Morning, boys and girls. Dragonkeeper 9600 here, and look at this cool swag I scored at my theater. Yeah, so the theater I work out was giving out these posters for free, so last night I snagged one. They had Wonder Woman posters too, but I thought owning this was more important, even though Wonder Woman is a better movie than Captain Underpants. Anyway, Captain Underpants review. I saw 2 movies this weekend because both these movies about superheroes came out. So I already did the Wonder Woman review. Now I'm going to talk about Captain Underpants. I'm going to start, like I've been starting with these videos, with an anecdote from the theater where I work. So I was working the register today, and this guy comes up with 2 kids. He looks like he's a guy maybe in his late 40s or so. And he he orders his food, and I pay, and he pays. And so I say my usual thing, which is enjoy your movie. And he has this look of just dread that only a parent can have, where he's like, someone please kill me. And he's like, I'll try. And I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, I've never seen a movie with the word underpants in the name. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. We'll have a nice day. So he's one of many parents who have no doubt been dragged against their will to this movie this weekend. And apparently a lot of parents have, because Captain Underpants is, and I can't believe the words that are coming out of my mouth, the number 2 movie in America, right behind Wonder Woman. Captain Underpants, in its opening weekend, debuted at number 2. You can't write this stuff, people. Okay. So, I was actually really excited for this movie, possibly even more than Wonder Woman, and I actually wasn't excited for it at all. I didn't care about it in the slightest until I saw the trailer. I happened to glimpse the trailer while I was upstairs on my break, and I watched it, and I'm like, this actually looks really cool and funny. The jokes were making me laugh, the animation was gorgeous, and it looked really energetic and fun. And I'm gonna say I saw it, and I liked it, but I didn't like it as much as I thought I would. I actually saw it yesterday. And I can already hear what you're thinking. Oh, really, Gene Siskel? You didn't like Captain Underpants as much as you thought you would? What are you, 48? I'm 23. You rude piece of shit that doesn't exist. And, yeah, I wasn't completely in love with it. I do like it, but, I do have problems with it, and they don't boil down to, oh, it's silly and it has toilet humor and it's immature, because those are all things I was expecting. I read the Captain Underpants books as a kid. I actually really liked them. I don't have them anymore because I donated them to my library when I was 14 or 15, but I read all the way up to 7. And yeah, so it's not like I went in there, I'm like, oh, these kids today, I can't believe what they're reading. No, I was there. Okay, I know. But let me just, before I get into why this movie had some problems and what did work in the movie, let me go ahead and talk about the premise for those of you who don't know. So, in a nutshell, Captain Underpants was a book series for elementary school kids, and the story goes that George and Harold, who are these 2 4th graders, George is a kid with the flat top and a tie, and Harold is the kid with the striped t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. They go to this elementary school, and they're not bad kids. They just like to have fun. But every adult that works at the school they are fun-hating assholes, which is weird, which was a weird, storytelling trait for kids media in, the 90s and early 2000s, that people who work in jobs where they're around kids a lot hate kids. I don't know why this was a thing for so long. I guess it has something to do with Gen X, 90s, anti-authority thing. But whatever. So the worst adult by far is their principal, Mr. Krupp, who hates all kids, but he especially hates George and Harold, who are constantly getting into trouble. So one day, to get them out of a particularly bad spot, George and Harold hypnotize their principal into using a magic ring called a hypno ring, into acting like a superhero that they created because they create comic books in their spare time, named Captain Underpants. And anytime that Mr. Krupp hears someone snap their fingers, he turns into Captain Underpants, and throwing water in his face will turn it back into Mr. Krupp. Now, unlike Mr. Krupp, Captain Underpants is heroic, silly, kind of a moron, and he's a grown man who, yes, runs around in nothing but his underwear and a cape. So basically, the series is Captain Underpants fights a long series of really immature villains, an evil scientist named Professor Poopy Pants, a talking toilet, the Turbo Toilet 2000 or something like that, Some of these robots that are like made of snot and robotic parts. Wedgie Woman, and who am I forgetting? Oh yeah, the lunch ladies from outer space who serve people radioactive stuff that turns them into zombie nerds. So based on the villains they face, you can kind of guess what the humor in these series is like. So in the movie, they basically cover the plot of... They sort of mash together elements from the first 4 books into one story because the books are really short and they're taken up mostly with illustrations. So basically you could cover like one 30-minute episode of a TV series with one book. So they basically had to mash it together to get it feature length. And the first thing that... Okay. So this movie had... I'm trying to figure out where to start with this. Okay, so... Sorry. The movie opens with a comic book detailing Captain Underpants' origin. And I actually like that they did this because Harold and George, that they create comics, is a big deal. Both of them, if you don't know, are based off the writer of the series, Dave Pilkey, who had ADHD as a kid and was constantly drawing comics instead of... participating in class, and he got in trouble all the time. So Harold and George are basically him, but split into 2 people, right down to both of them having ADHD. So, what a lot of people like about this movie, let me go over the positives first, is that there are a lot of different animation styles. So first of all, the animation style used throughout the main film is basically the illustrations from the book, but rendered in a 3D art style, and it is gorgeous. And that's one thing the trailers didn't lie about. Apparently, this movie was made really cheaply on a budget of $38 million by outsourcing to Canada. Of course. Canada is amazing at making cartoons. And it sort of reminds a lot of people of Blue Sky's Peanuts film, the way they're able to like have characters that look 2D, but they move and exist in a 3D space. And they look like I'll show you the image on the back if you haven't seen. These are all 3D character models, but they look really cartoony and colorful, and they retain the same shapes as the illustrations in the book. And it's also really fluid and lively and really quick, which is good for a series like this that has a lot of energy. But aside from that, they're also they use stop motion and sock puppets in one sequence because Harold and George are imagining what will happen if they stop being friends, and Harold does this imagined spot with sock puppets. So they actually film real live action sock puppets and then do stop motion with these robots and stuff. And then they also do 2D animation for the comic book sections. And you're really going to be excited about this. They incorporate Flip-O-Rama, which is basically these 2-page kind of flip books that every Captain Underpants book came with. So there'd be one image and then a second image, and you're supposed to put your hand on the book and then do this with your thumb to flip it back and forth. So people like that because it shows that it's really creative and fluid, and there's a lot of different, there's a lot of variety to it. I should also talk about the voices real quick. Kevin Hart and Tom Middlemarch voice George and Harold respectively. They do a okay job, but the main problem I had with them is the same problem a lot of people had, is that they do not sound like kids. Harold and George are supposed to be in 4th grade. They sound like adults because they are adults. And it's not like Sam Vincent, when he voiced a kid, he tries to sound like a kid. They're not even trying. They just use their basically their normal speaking voice, except they say immature things. So this was also a problem that the Lorax had when Ted opens his mouth and Zac Efron's voice comes out. It's wow, you are 20 years too old to be voicing this character. It's weird. On the other hand, Ed Helms voices Mr. Krupp and Captain Underpants, and he killed it. He did an amazing job. He was charismatic, he was funny in both forms, and he really switched between the angry, I hate children, Mr. Krupp, to the joyful tra-la-la Captain Underpants really easily, and you could tell it was him doing both voices, but because the tone and the things he was saying was different, it was really good. I thought he really did a good job. Ed Helms was also in the Lorax. I don't know why I keep referencing the Lorax. I've never even seen that movie. The villain of the movie is Professor Poopy Pants, who's the villain in the fourth book, sorry, but they brought him in for the first movie because, like, he's basically the closest thing to, like, recurring antagonist the series has. And, Nick Kroll, who voices him, gives him, like, a German accent, which I never imagined as a kid he would have. And, it's like a cartoony, like, villain German accent. I don't know why both of the movies I reviewed this weekend have villains with German accents. That's okay. But what he actually, like, Nick Kroll as Poopy Pants has some of the best lines in the film. He what I like about Poopy Pants is that he's not sentimental at all. So basically, Poopy Pants' goal in the movie is to rid the world of laughter because he's tired of people laughing at his stupid name. And in case you haven't read the books, Professor Poopy Pants is his legal name. Like, he really is a professor. And the country that he's from, New Swissland, which does not exist, has a tradition where everybody has a stupid name. So he wants to rid the world of laughter. So when he brings this up in the classroom after he gets hired as a science teacher, the kids are like, isn't laughter the best medicine? And he's like, no, medicine is the best medicine. I just love how frank that was. And there's another scene where he's trying to power up, like, a giant robot, and they're out of fuel, so he asks Melvin, who's this nerdy kid, like, what's the greatest source of power? And Melvin is like, the power that comes inside us? He's like, no, that's just stuff on posters. He's, like, getting annoyed with the kid's inspirational bullshit. And there's one line they use in the trailer where George tells the professor that his problem is that he can't laugh at himself. And the professor's response is, oh, really, Oprah? Is that my problem? Just every line of his was great because he's so sassy. I should talk about Melvin's voice, too. Melvin's voice sounds nerdy. It doesn't sound like a kid. It sounds like someone, like, do a nerd voice. And, like, I actually thought about what it sounded like, and I realized it sounds the most like Herbie the Misfit Elf from the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer special. Like, what do you say we be independent together? That's what it sounds like. It's probably not the same guy. I don't know who voices Melvin. I'll post it on the screen later. But, yeah, I'm pretty sure the guy who originally voiced Herbie is dead. And, like, in the, like, CGI sequel that Good Times did, it was Scott McNeil. So I don't think it was Scott McNeil voicing Melvin. But, yeah, I thought it was funny. Like, he has, like, this very nasally kind of, like, Mandark voice. But not Mandark at all, because Mandark's got a very distinctive, unique voice. So, let me talk about the comedy, too. Not every joke worked with me. I've heard some people say different, that this movie, like, had them dying in their seats, like, every single joke. But there were a few that, like, just kind of felt, like, kind of, eh. Like, this was clearly, like, made with a young audience in mind, because not many adults are going to see Captain Underpants willingly. And if they are, they're young adults like me who grew up with the books. And, like, so some of the jokes are kind of like, this is funny, which I don't really like that. I don't like it when movies are, like, telegraphing what a joke is or when it's coming. Like, it's like this very self-conscious, we are trying to be funny vibe. I can't really describe it, but it's just, like, a sensation that you get where you're like, okay, yeah. For instance, there's one joke early on where George and Harold, who talk directly to the camera a few times, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And they're, like, explaining, we came up with Captain Underpants because, like, superheroes always look like they're flying around in their underwear. And it's like, we get that that's what the joke is. You don't have to tell us that. I get this is for little kids, but, like, I feel like they get that. And even if they didn't, they'd get it when they get older. Like, it's a pretty obvious joke that, yeah, superheroes wear their underwear on the outside. Why else would we run around in colored undies? But there were other jokes that really worked. The joke that I laughed the hardest was basically Mr. Krupp is trying to catch George and Harold doing wrong. So he enlists Melvin's help. And Melvin comes up with like a robot turtle with a camera in the head so it can like look around and spy on them. So this camera has the evidence against George and Harold on it. So George and Harold are trying to sneak it out of Mr. Krupp's office. But they look through his office and they can't find it. Mr. Krupp catches them and he lifts his plant leg and reveals that the turtle is strapped to his leg. And he's like, Mr. Turtle and I have grown really close. It never leaves my side, even in the shower. And it zooms in on the turtle's face. And it has like, it's normally smiling, but now it has a horrified look and a single tear runs down its cheek. When that scene happened in the theater, I ugly laughed. Like, you know that laugh I do in my reaction vids where it like comes from the back of my throat and I get a little hoarse? Like I just go, ah! That's what I did in this theater full of children. I don't regret anything. It was really funny. One of my favorite bits is, so basically, Mr. Krupp, for catching them for messing around at the invention convention, which is a plot borrowed from the book, they basically sabotage Melvin's invention. So Mr. Krupp, having finally caught them in the act, thanks to a very traumatized turtle, has plans to put them in separate classes. So to get out of this, George hypnotizes him with the hypno ring, and they turn him into Captain Underpants just for fun. It's notable, this is kind of a slight change from the books, where George and Harold, in the books, had no doubt that the hypno ring would work. In the movie, it was kind of spur of the moment. Like, George had the hypno ring because he had just pulled it out of the drawer where Mr. Krupp had confiscated all their stuff, and he didn't know what else to do, so he's just like, you're getting sleepy, because he didn't know. He just panicked, but it ended up working. So they turn him into Captain Underpants, and their hero that they came up with is standing in front of them. It's a really glorious moment, and they're, like, laughing because they can't believe they just did this to their principal. And then Captain Underpants is like, evil is the fun, or, you know, like whatever. And then he jumps out the window, which is closed, and it leaves a perfect silhouette. And then they like run to the window and watch horrified. And then he runs from the road, is immediately hit by a car, gets up, says he's fine. Then he runs across the street, vaults the fence, and then he lands behind it. And you hear like a crack. He's out of sight now, but you hear like a trash can like crash, and then like in the distance you hear a cat meow. And then you cut to the window, and George or Harold just staring at him out the window aghast. Like, that shot only lasts for a beat, but that was amazing, and that was exactly the type of like quick humor that I was hoping when I saw the trailer that this movie would be. Like, it goes from haha this is funny to oh my god, what have we done, in like 5 seconds. That actually leads me to my main problem with this movie. There's not as much superhero stuff in it as I wanted there to be. Like, most of the trailer and the clips I focused on Captain Underpants being an idiot and George and Harold running after him trying to stop him from hurting himself or someone else. But the movie doesn't do that. Like, it has that sequence, you know, he runs around in town, he sees a mine trapped behind a box and tries to free him, and he like, you know, there's that hilarious clip of him in the elevator, like, pretending to fly, and the couple is backed against the door, desperately pushing the open door button. Like, all that stuff is funny. But after that, they made Captain Underpants go undercover as Mr. Krupp. So Captain Underpants now has to pretend to be Mr. Krupp and is basically acting as their principal. So what it becomes now is a we made our mean principal nice plot. And that's not as interesting to me personally. It is kind of adorable to see Captain Underpants like struggle with clothes, and it's actually him that hires Professor Poopy Pants to replace the old science teacher, which is weird. You think Mr. Krupp would have hired him since that's how in the book, but no, Captain Underpants ends up hiring him. And so basically, like, he reopens the art program, and he, like, orders a carnival for the kids, and he's basically running around, like, being super friendly, and, like, that's cool, but it's more like the plot of, like, I don't know, one of those, like, sitcoms, well, and not sitcoms, like, those kids' comedies from, like, the 90s, like, I think there was, like, one film, I don't remember the title, where, like, a rich, snooty woman, like, gets amnesia, and this guy tricks her into thinking that she's his wife, and like she becomes way nicer. First of all, that's probably a sexual crime. But second of all, that's the type of plot that we're dealing with now. It's just like, well, this character has basically been changed via outrageous circumstances. He's acting nicer. That's not really what I wanted to see. Like, they do have the superhero stuff. Captain Underpants, you know, fights Professor Poopy Pants, tries to save the day, runs around, acts like an idiot, and they do have, like, the shenanigans where, like, he, like, gets water dumped on him in the most inopportune time, so he changes back. And they there's this one hilarious sequence where they're just rapid firing, changing it back and forth. They throw water on him, then snap immediately. And I love that Mr. Crab, every time he reappears, is getting increasingly scared. What's happening? Because they just keep switching him back and forth. This man's brain is going to fall apart one day from all this trauma. But yeah, I wanted there to be more superhero stuff. Another problem I had is, as I mentioned, the fourth wall breaking stuff. George and Harold talk directly to the camera. I'm not a big fan of the meta thing personally, and I feel like it gets so in the way of the more subtle kind of visual storytelling that I like in film. But listen to me, I actually sound like a legit reviewer when they do that. I get why they had to do it, because Captain Underpants had a few fourth wall jokes, and the narrator was kind of involved. And there were a few times where George would yell at the narrator after a particularly disgusting description for making him sick. And the narrator would describe how someone kicks a ball so hard that it actually smashes through one page and goes through another. And the books basically eliminated the fourth wall at certain moments. But the thing with a book is that the narrator is usually invisible, so you don't notice them most of the time. If you just read a book, it has to have narration. So the moments where the fourth wall things pop up, it pops up and then goes back down. If the film had a narrator, a la the Stanley Parable or Winnie the Pooh or something, the narrator then becomes a character. And the narrator never really was a character, strictly speaking, Captain Underpants. So that changes the dynamic and everything if the focus isn't on George and Harold and the captain. So they feel they had to have George and Harold talk. And they say the thing I'm George Beard and this is my best friend Harold Hutchins, kind of mimicking the intro to the books, and they explain who Mr. Krupp is, and they do a gag where after they sabotage the invention convention, they actually roll fake credits behind them while they say goodbye to the audience, even though this is less than 10 minutes in the film, because they make it feel the whole movie was just them saving the day by making the invention convention less boring. And I thought maybe the fourth wall stuff would end there, and they stop talking to the camera for a while, but near the end they do it again. So it's kind of schizophrenic, oh, so the fourth wall stuff is outside of the opening bit, whatever. It didn't really work for me. Another thing is, this movie was clearly made by fans of the books or people who are really, really familiar with the books. It follows the plots really closely. The characters are rendered really well. And I'll talk a little bit more about the characters in detail because I do want to get into some analysis if I can. Why do I always want to analyze this stuff for kids? I don't know. But I feel maybe the movie is a little too into the lore of the books. There are certain things that only make sense if you're a fan of the books. For instance, I mentioned Flipperama. That's a thing from the books, and they actually do Flipperama in the movie. So they're in the middle of an action scene, and they pause it, and they say that they have a joke the following action scene is too disturbing, also too expensive for us to do, so we're going to render it in Flipperama. So they actually do the thing where they flip the pages. Okay, and that's cool because it's a reference to the books. People are oh man, they actually made it in the movie. But think about this. What if you're somebody's grandmother? And you're spending the day with your grandkids, and you want to take the movies. What do you kids want to see? And they're we want to see Captain Underpants. And you're okay, that sounds stupid, but whatever the kids want to watch. And you go, and they pause this action scene, they start doing the flip thing, and you're wondering, what the hell? Why are they doing this? You wouldn't get it. And if the film doesn't want to cater to people who haven't read the books, that's fine. But it did bother me a little. There's one joke early in the opening where they're doing the comic book. There was this running gag in the books where the comics are written by fourth graders, so they have fourth grade non sequitur humor. So they see Captain Underpants flying in the sky, and they're one person's it's a bird, another's it's a plane, and the third person's it's an egg salad sandwich. And the joke is, an egg salad sandwich is not something that you would think would be flying in the sky. But then in the opening comic book, someone says, it's an egg salad sandwich, and it cuts to show an actual flying evil egg salad sandwich that Captain Underpants now has to fight. And now that joke is kind of lost on people who haven't read the books because it's oh, he's fighting an egg salad sandwich, haha, random. It's no, the random thing was a different was in the fact that he was saying the line itself. It wasn't that he's fighting an exiled Sam. Like, you see that, like, the connecting thread is, like, snipped if you haven't read the books. That said, there are a few changes to the source material that I want to talk about. First of all, a lot of the characters are a lot nicer than they were in the original books. Most notably is Mr. Crump. Mr. Crump was basically kind of an irredeemable child hater in the books. He never outright hit kids. Like, he was never abusive, but he was really strict, unpleasant personality, and a lot of the humor just came from how, like, very, very angry he got at George and Harold. The movie changes this. So he's still mean and nasty and the kids are afraid of him, but they also, like, kind of try to make, like, a sympathetic side to him. There's one point where they go to his house and they see that it's completely, basically he lives by himself, and, like, every wall is, like, blue and, like, all the lights are off. He owns one fork because he doesn't need more than one fork, and, like, a table in his dining room with one chair. And there's this, like, really, like, funny visual gag, like a really quick gag where they go into the bathroom and one towel says his and the towel next to it says also his. So he's, like, alone and by himself, and because he's lonely, that makes him lash out. And he also has, like, a few moments where he's, like, not as nasty. Like, okay, this is going to be really weird for people who read the books and haven't seen anything about this movie. Mr. Crump has a love interest now. Like, I don't know if you're aware of this, but they made up a new character named Edith, who's voiced by Kristen Shaw. I need to double check this, but I'm pretty sure that she's the one who voiced, hold on. Okay. I thought she'd voiced Penelope Von Sweet from Wreck-It Ralph, but I was actually wrong. She's the voice of Mabel Pines from Gravity Falls. So, yeah, Mr. Crump is dating Mabel. It's weird. So yeah, and when he's around Edith, he's, like, a completely different person. Like, he's really, like, shy and awkward, and it's clear that he likes her a lot. And it's, like, weird to see because the most experience that I recall Mr. Crump's having with women is when George and Harold tricked Miss Ribble into thinking he wanted to marry her, which is one of the funniest scenes in the books, by the way. I laughed so hard. But here he's, like actually interested and doesn't know what to say, and he's, like, you know, it's cute. I should talk a little bit about Edith herself. She's also really cute, but what I like about her is that there's, like, this running gag where she's really shy, and she likes Mr. Crump too, but she doesn't know how to, like, say it outright. So, like, she'll just, like, appear, like, out of nowhere, like a freaking weeping angel. Like, Mr. Crump has the cupboard opening, close it, and she's right there, like, just staring right at him. Like, it's like, ah, it feels so quiet. She does that twice. She just stares. It's like, you know, her Mabel voice, like, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just was making this casserole and I noticed that it has your name on it. Like, at first you're wondering, like, is she going to be creepy? And she is a little, but, you know, she's creepy in, like, a socially awkward way, not an I'm a yandere way. Too bad for some of you. Speaking of characters who are nicer, George and Harold are actually, like, they were never bad kids. Like, that was always the intro of every book. George and Harold weren't bad kids, despite what the adults said. But this movie actually goes out of their way to make them more heroic. And I don't think that really works, because I like George and Harold because they were just kids. They acted out in class and pulled pranks because they liked to laugh, and they were ADHD and couldn't help it. And I feel like that's reason enough. But in the invention convention, which is, first of all, super boring, Melvin is the only one who invented everything, and thus he gets all the attention for himself, while the rest of the kids have to sit there quietly. And it's mandatory and on a Saturday. So it's, like, completely irredeemable, like, drudgery, mind control, or thought control, basically, thing. And so George and Harold decide they have to sabotage it. Not for their sakes, but for the sake of the children, because we want to free the kids and make life better for them. We stand up for the kids. And I don't feel like that's really what the books were about. It wasn't about George and Harold standing up for them. It was about George and Harold were like, we need to let kids express themselves. And I feel like they go a little too far with that message and try to push it maybe even harder than Dave Pilkey, who was not known for being subtle, was pushing it. So, like, they make one joke about where Mr. Krupp has, like, a very expensive lockdown door to prevent the boys from leaving his office. Like, it, like, slams down with, like, red glowing lights and it, like, bolts itself and it's, like, robotic. And he's like, it was a choice between that or the music and arts program. I think I made the right choice. I think a joke like that is more in spirit with the books. But one of the things that Captain Underpants, acting as Mr. Krupp, does is reopen the arts program. And, like, there's this scene of, like, the kids sitting around, like, with, like, bright, happy faces and, like, drawing things and, like, painting, and it's all, like, idyllic and really ordered and sunny. And I'm like, yeah, right. You unleash a bunch of kids in an art room and they're all going to behave and not make a mess. Like, okay. Sure. I mean, I like kids, but come on. You should see what the theaters look like after Captain Underpants. There's popcorn everywhere. So, yeah, they're, like, pushing it really hard and, like, making the kids being the heroes that stand up to the man. And I think, like, I feel like the point of the books is, like, kids don't need a higher reason or higher purpose to act out. As long as they're not hurting anyone, just having kids sit in chairs and making them sit still all the time. Like, Dave Pilkey has this great quote where he said, like, we spend the first 2 years of a child's life teaching them to walk and talk, and then spend the next 14 years trying to teach them to sit down and shut up. And so basically, that's the ideological thread that connects a lot of the books. And the reason Captain Underpants books end up on the most banned book list is a lot of people think not just because they have toilet humor and they're immature, but also because they have a very, like, tangible authority is not always right message that a lot of school libraries don't want to indulge in. So, like, all the adults in Captain Underpants are unreasonable and they're mean to the kids, and they, like, they'll get mad at them just for laughing because they assume if children are laughing, then they must be doing something wrong, you know. And that's a good message, and the public school system is flawed. But the movie tries to take it a little too far by portraying a kids are always right thing, which was not really, again, it's been a while, but it's not really what the books were about. And I feel like it's trying a little too hard to push the film's message. They don't always bungle it, though. Like, there's one scene where Miss Ribble, one of the teachers in the books, is, like, telling the kids to memorize dates. Like, not telling them what the dates are for or why they're significant, just she reads a list of dates and tells them to memorize them. And that's a pretty good satire of what public school is like. Just like, learn this. Why is it useful? I don't know. Just shove it in your stupid tiny brain, you dumb little midgets. Okay. Another thing that goes too far is that the stakes are that George and Harold, aside from, you know, the madman who wants to eliminate laughter from the world, George and Harold don't want to be separated from the same class because they feel like their friendship would be over. Which is great and all, except the kids, George and Harold, live next door, and they share a treehouse. And they go there every day after school. Like, why are you worried about your friendship splitting up? And, like, I thought maybe for a second that was supposed to be the joke. Like, they're blowing this thing way out of proportion. Like, Mr. Krupp laughs evilly as though he's come up with a truly diabolical scheme when he explains that he's going to put them in separate classes, which he should have done a while ago, because it seems like they act up a lot, honestly. But they live next door! Like, how could their friendship be over forever? And, like, I thought that was the joke. But then, like, at the end of the movie, they, like, when it looks like they have to make Captain Underpants go away for good, they make a solemn pledge to stay friends till the end of time. And it's played like a serious moment with like subtle music, and it isn't over the top, and it's like, you live next door. And summer exists. And so do phones. But you don't need them because you live next door. It's weird. Professor Poopy Pants' character has also changed. Like, ironically, everybody else is made nicer. He's actually made meaner. I remember there was an arc in the books where, first of all, he comes up with two inventions called the Shrinky Pig and the Goosey Grow. The Shrinky Pig can make objects shrink infinitesimally, and there doesn't seem to be a limit. And the Goosey Grow makes things grow. So he wanted to use the Shrinky Pig to end the world's pollution problem by basically just shrinking all the landfills. that's a great idea. He also wants to eliminate world hunger by making food grow. I'm not sure that they would solve world hunger because, we need, like, a way to distribute the food. It's not that there's not enough food to go around. It's just it's not in the right places. But, again, that's a noble goal. But he descends into madness because people can't stop laughing at his stupid name. In the movie, that seems to have already happened. And, like, Professor Poopy Pants, first of all, the Goosey Girl and the Shrinky Pig have been changed into one, have been condensed into one object that just changes size called the Shrinkerizer, which makes me think of, like, Dr. Doofenshmirtz, Phineas and Ferb, like, the Shrinkinator! So, and he never, like, lists any lofty goals for them, and even Melvin suggests, wow, you can make things grow, you could solve world hunger, and he's like, I guess. So he, like, he has no interest in saving the world through his inventions like he does before, and it was actually kind of played like a tragedy in the books, like a really stupid tragedy, but, like, George and Harold draw a comic with Professor Poopy Pants as the villain, and that's what makes him snap and turn into madness, and it's, like, really disturbing kind of illustration where, like, their veins are showing his head and it's like he's drooling and smiling wickedly and like he never has before. It's like, ugh. But they imply in the movie, like I said, that's already happened because George and Harold flip through his phone. It's like, you were in a really dark place. Revenge, die, they'll all pay. Am I reading this right? But, yeah, it's weird they made the villain nastier and the heroes nicer, I guess, so there'd be, like, a more clear-cut good and evil. But I like narratives that portray kids just being kids. That's kind of why I like Ed, Ed and Eddie, because those boys are not saints by any means. But they're also not completely, like, they're not completely rotten either. They have good moments and bad moments, and people are more complicated than that, and kids are more complicated than that. So one last thing I want to talk about is that this movie does actually treat Captain Underpants differently than they do in the book. Like, Captain Underpants is a complete different alter ego in the books that springs into existence when they snap their fingers. Captain Underpants, they make it more clear in the movie that Captain Underpants is like a latent version of Mr. Krupp. That they basically, Captain Underpants basically can't do anything or say anything that Mr. Krupp's couldn't. Like, it's like, I feel like that I explained it poorly just now. Like, okay, so some fans speculated that because Mr. Krupp can perfectly ape Captain Underpants when they hypnotize him, that must mean that he's read their comics. Even though he hates it when they draw comics because they should be paying attention in class, he thinks the comics themselves are juvenile, and the first scene in the movie is him tearing up the comic that they just made, to their horror. But the fans think he must have read them or else he couldn't duplicate the character when he's hypnotized. And sure enough, when Harold and George in the movie are looking through the drawer of the stuff they confiscated, they find a stack of a bunch of their comics. And Harold is like, do you think he reads these? And George is like, no way. It's like, he's got them. So he has to have read them. Like, when I got to that point in the movie, I was like, oh my God, he has read them. And so yeah, you know what I mean by that is by Captain Underpants can't do anything that Mr. Krupp wouldn't is basically like you could see like still traces of his personality. Captain Underpants, for instance, is still attracted to Edith, which I thought was really cute. Like Edith comes up to Captain Underpants, who's in disguise as Mr. Krupp, and she's like, "Did you like the casserole I gave you?" Like in her Mabel voice. He's like, "I do not recall eating your casserole," and she's like heartbroken. But he's like, "But if it was as striking as your one blue eye, then it must have been amazing." And she's like, it's like, oh my God, stop. You're not supposed to be like actually cute. Like, you need to stop, Ed Helms. Miss me with that cute shit. But yeah, so like I think the creators of this movie outright implied that like Captain Underpants is like the germ of like goodness in Mr. Krupp that's allowed to come out because of the hypnotism. So it's more like he has a split personality and not just like another person exists in his body, which is not what split personality is. Even someone with like 40 different alters, all those alters are facets of like the same person. Like someone with multiple personalities is one person, but the different personalities are different. And that's what they're doing in this movie. So I thought that was more interesting, and one of the things I actually like better, like there aren't a whole lot of things that I feel like this is better than the books. That was one of them. I like the way they portrayed Mr. Krupps and Captain Underpants and how they were both two different sides of the same person. Again, part of it is probably due to Ed Helms' amazing voice work. Like, seriously, this guy was born to play this role. Like, the one star, who cares? Captain Underpants is where it's at. Yeah. So, basically, if you could cobble that 40-minute rant together in a coherent review, that's what I thought of Captain Underpants. It had some flaws, but I think those flaws are things that bothered me personally and won't bother anyone. I've heard a lot of people, even adults, say that they laughed really hard at this movie, and kids will absolutely love it. Like, I guarantee you. There's a running gag where people can't stop laughing at Professor Poopy Pants' name. Literally every time they said the name Professor Poopy Pants in the theater, every single kid laughed, and they laughed hard. Like, apparently just saying Professor Poopy Pants is grade A gold star comedy to little kids. The toilet humor isn't too bad. Like, I feel like it wasn't that bad in the books either. Like, it wasn't like straight up gross out humor like something like Ren and Stimpy or Garbage Pail Kids would have. Like, I didn't realize there was such a thing as tasteful potty humor, but there is. You never actually see anything dirty in the movie. It's mostly just them saying the words pee-pee or like poopy pants or whatever. And like the movie itself looks very clean and colorful and stuff. Even the toilets look like spotless and shiny. But yeah, kids are going to love this movie. Adults might find it a little tiresome, but I think if you've read the books, you'll enjoy it, and you might enjoy watching it with your kid. I don't know if I can see an adult enjoying this and watching it by itself without being familiar with the books, but hey, maybe I'm wrong about that. Watching this movie wasn't really nostalgic for me because I'm nostalgic for the books and seeing a movie represent the same things. Like, this movie is new and it's got like current voice actors and really beautiful, like up-to-date animation and stuff. So I didn't feel nostalgic, but it was kind of weird for me to see like so many things I remember from my childhood being re-represented on the screen. Like, they show like every faculty member from the books. Like, a lot of them are not named, but Miss Ribble is there, Mr. Fight is there, the gym coach is there, Miss Anthrop is there. Like, you can see them all. All their character models are there, and they're interacting with the kids. It's like, oh, I remember her. Oh, I remember him. Yeah, it's that guy. And they like, even though like a lot of elements from the other books aren't in this movie, they like show them. Like, George and Harold have drawn pictures of like the alien lunch ladies from the third book, and like near the end, the talking toilets come to life, which is like a plot from the second book that didn't really come up most of the first movie, and they're jumping around with sharp teeth and gobbling people and saying yum yum, eat 'em up, and I remembered that from my childhood. It's like, wow, I am actually seeing that drawing on the big screen and hearing the line that I read in the book, and it's like here, and it's like moving in front of me. I did not think this day would come. Like, it wasn't nostalgic. It was just like, whoa, this is weird. Like, but it was like weird in a good way. Like, life is beautiful. I didn't feel like that weird chill of nostalgia, you feel when you're like, whoa. But it was like weird to see that come to life. And I had to like take a minute to think about like, wow, my life has really advanced since I first saw that drawing that this is now based off, and a lot of kids are going to be like watching this over and over as they grow up. It was sobering. It was a sobering moment, which is weird because it was such a wild, crazy movie. So there are a lot of jokes and lines and scenes that I didn't talk about, but that are all good and all funny. And you could judge based on my problems in the movie whether or not they'll really bother you. But I think this movie is worth seeing and worth judging for yourself. So, yeah, I probably won't be doing another film review for another few weeks. Ooh, the next one might actually be Transformers. Oh, that'll be exciting. So this is Dragon Keeper 9600 signing off. Oh, fine, I'll do it. Tra-la-la!